Hey everyone, Pugs here, and welcome back to another big season overview, this time featuring Season 8 of SpongeBob SquarePants. If you're a returning viewer, welcome back, and you already know the drill. If this is your first season overview of me, first of all, welcome to the channel and to this little series. I'm gonna briefly explain how this works, so listen closely. I'm gonna go on our favorite website, tiermaker.com, and make a tier list of all the episodes in Season 8 of SpongeBob SquarePants, talking a little about each episode as I go. If you want to hear my full thoughts on a specific episode, well, you're in luck, because I've got a whole bunch of reviews right here on the channel that you can check out. As I go through the tier list, you'll notice that I have very specific tiers that I use because I use my own rating system, which you can see on the screen now. I'm not gonna really go into what makes each rating. If you want to know more about that, you can check out my Season 1 overview where I did do that explanation, and that's linked in the description. Once I'm finished with this tier list, I'm going to do a large discussion about Season 8 as a whole, including my average episode rating for the season, and the name that I've given to the season. Alright, I think that may just be the quickest rundown I've ever given for one of these. I'm not fact-checking that, by the way. But before I jump right into the tier list, y'all already know I gotta say a big, huge thank you to everyone watching today and to everyone who has been watching the channel. It's a really hectic time, in my life right now, hence the frequent breaks I've been taking, but y'all are still here and supporting the channel, and that just makes me really happy. Alright, I think it's about time we get right into the tier list, so let me transition over to the section of this video that'll be taking place on our favorite tier making website. Here we are, back again on tiermaker.com. Y'all already know what it is. I'm gonna start with the best episode of the season and end with the worst. Let's just get right to my top 5. Starting off this top 5 list is, of course, my absolute favorite episode of the season, and what else could I put for this but Planet of the Jellyfish, which had come in with a score of 9.6 out of 10. Yeah, so this episode was simply fantastic. I adore when this show combines horror elements with comedy, and while this episode was 99% comedy, that little smattering of horror really helped it immensely. The plot was just so enjoyable and fun, and it never took itself seriously, which is the way to go, in my opinion. It was just silly. And this episode is also really funny. I also like how nothing was really explained in the end, but not in a way that somewhat bothered me like Spongehenge always did. Also, Sandy is featured in this one. That's a win right there. Up next, for my second favorite of the season, that's gonna go to Ghoul Fools, which had a score of 9.5 out of 10. This was an excellent Halloween special that knew how to cultivate atmosphere while being hilarious. This episode is criminally underrated, I think because it's so often compared to Scaredy Pants or Ghost Host, and that's a shame because I love this one. The one-off character is excellent, the appearance of the Flying Dutchman is perfect for me, and I just love Halloween, so that's yet even more going on in this episode's favor. I also love the characters included here, with all of our big 5 having something to do, and I love how the episode doesn't quite end with the status quo. It's fun that way. Coming up next, for number 3 of my top 5 episodes of Season 8, that's going to be The Good Krabby Name, which had also come in with a score of 9.5 out of 10. This episode is just really freaking good. Mr. Krabs especially is a treat with how extreme he takes his money making, and I love watching the antics of SpongeBob and Patrick as they try to get a few very specific Bikini Bottomites to eat at the Krusty Krab. Lots of great jokes in this one. I also think this episode is incredibly underrated, which is a shame. In 4th place for my top 5 of the season, we've got Mr. Krabs Takes a Vacation, which also came in with a score of 9.4 out of 10. This is just a really great episode. It's funny for one thing, but where it really takes the cake is in the character dynamics. I mean, making overt references to the Mr. Krabs and SpongeBob father-son relationship that I literally adore is a great way for me to love an episode. And this episode has that in droves. Even better is the substantial inclusion of Pearl here, making this episode a bit of a wholesome family romp, similar to the episode that started this whole anthology, A SquarePants Family Vacation. And then for number 5 on my top 5, that's gonna be It's a SpongeBob Christmas, which came in with a score of 9.4 out of 10. Festive, fun, and fantastic, It's a SpongeBob Christmas is exactly what I like to see out of this show and out of a Christmas special from this show in particular. Of course, the biggest selling point of this episode is its amazing stop-motion animation, and that makes sense because this animation is great, and there's so many small details to love about it when you look. I'm glad that we've gotten more SpongeBob content of this kind of animation, but while the animation is excellent here, it doesn't carry the episode, not for me, because this episode is still plenty funny and I like the plot a lot. There's only a couple moments of irritation here and there, but they are fleeting and hardly put a damper on my experience at all. So, there were 14 episodes that made it into the amazing tier for this season, and I've just covered the first 5. So, moving on to the other ones, there were 2 other episodes that I gave a score of 9.4 out of 10, and the first of these is going to be the season opener, Accidents Will Happen. This episode is hilarious and dramatic, and the dynamics between our 3 main characters here, Squidward, Mr. Krabs, and to a lesser extent SpongeBob, are in top form. Watching Squidward troll Mr. Krabs is great and builds on their existing chemistry as well as everything we've seen from this show prior to this episode, and it's quite nice to see an episode implicitly using its history like this, something that'll surely become more and more common as we move to newer and newer seasons. As for the last episode to be given a score of 9.4 out of 10, that's going to be Chum Fricassee. Coincidentally, also an episode heavily featuring Squidward antagonizing Mr. Krabs. I really like this episode for a lot of reasons. For one thing, it's funny and amusing, and I think the plot is great. But more importantly, Chum Fricassee feeds us fans by giving us some really good Squidward and Plankton interactions. I really like how this episode emphasizes that they are more business partners than anything else. Their megalomaniacal attitudes preventing them from forming any deeper connection than that. I think it's a very fitting way to pursue a dynamic between these characters, and it definitely drives the episode along with SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs' portions of it. Next up, there were 3 episodes to be given a score of 9.3 out of 10, so not too bad of a tie. The first of these is gonna be Bubble Troubles. This episode is really freaking funny, and all the interactions between the characters involved were excellent. Also, boosting this episode in my eyes is its rather macabre nature, given that it's literally about saving Sandy from fucking drowning after SpongeBob and Patrick fuck up her air supply. But the jokes really keep coming in this one, and it's rather action-packed, yet varied adventure, with one of those endings that doesn't truly set things back to the status quo. I really enjoyed it. The next episode to be given a score of 9.3 out of 10 is Hello Bikini Bottom. This was just an excellent special that had a lot of whimsy to it. I loved the musical aspect, which is unusual for me. I'm not a huge musical fan, but the songs in this episode were really good. Also really good were the visuals, which were gorgeous, and when they weren't gorgeous, they were incredibly expressive. This was an episode with some great dynamics between SpongeBob, Mr. Krabs, and Squidward, and Patrick too, just to a much lesser degree. I also think this episode really brought the humor, especially when it came to Mr. Krabs being a cheap ass. This episode may be ever so slightly overrated, but I mean, I completely understand why it's regarded so positively. And then the last episode to come in with a score of 9.3 out of 10 is going to be The Krabby Patty That Ate Bikini Bottom. Funny, adventurous, and just a teensy bit of horror-pilled, The Krabby Patty That Ate Bikini Bottom is a really fun episode that I've got no problems with at all. The humor is at its A game here, and I just really had a lot of fun watching this episode and seeing all the little gifs in the character interactions, like between Sandy and Mr. Krabs, or SpongeBob and Squidward. There's also just this vibe to these, like, Bikini Bottom disaster episodes that I really like. I don't know if it's the chaotic nature of them or what, but I usually enjoy them. Not all the time, but usually. And so this episode certainly gets a boost because of that. Next up, 2 episodes came in with a score of 9.2 out of 10, and the first of these is going to be Barnacle Face. This was a much-needed Pearl-focused episode, and I really appreciated the dynamic between Pearl and SpongeBob here, with them having a sibling relationship that calls to mind the chaperone, or, as I said a bit earlier, Mr. Krabs Takes a Vacation. And I love that this episode has a little bit of, I guess I could call it layered storytelling going on with some foreshadowing present here, and the end of it is very cathartic. Following right behind that episode, also of course with a 9.2 out of 10, is going to be Demolition Doofus. Yeah, so I already know a lot of people aren't happy with this placement or this score, but hear me out. This episode is funny. Mrs. Puff having homicidal inclinations towards SpongeBob is funny. SpongeBob being a part of a demolition derby is funny. So really, there was no reason or no way I was gonna leave this episode unhappy. The only thing I don't really like in this one is an out-of-character moment from SpongeBob when he makes that really awful joke calling Mrs. Puff Mrs. Pop. Like, I just don't see him doing that. But the episode recovers quickly from this little blunder and entertains me all the way to the end. So it's a notorious one, but not to me. And if you want any more thoughts on that, I'd suggest watching my review for it. We've got 2 more episodes going in this tier, and thankfully for me, they each have different scores. So the first of these is going to be Frozen Face Off, which which I had given a score of 9.1 out of 10. This is a hella underrated special, and I mean extremely underrated, almost as underrated as SpongeBob SquarePants versus the Big One, which this episode curiously reminds me of in many ways. I also very much appreciate all the characters included in this episode, even if I wish that Mrs. Puff or Pearl could have gotten in on this main character action. But all of the characters are great here, the humor is pretty good, and the plot itself is just fun to watch. And for the last episode of the amazing tier, this is going to be The Way of the Sponge, which had come in at a flat 9 out of 10. I was surprisingly impressed by this episode. I was expecting to be somewhat perturbed throughout the whole thing, but I had fun with it. Having karate be revisited can often be a treat, even if some of the newer episodes having to do with karate were rather poor. I also enjoyed the one-off character in this episode, Fuzzy Acorns, a lot, and where this episode really shines is in how Sandy and SpongeBob's friendship was portrayed, especially seeing Sandy be a really great friend to SpongeBob made me happy. The only thing I really didn't love about this episode is that SpongeBob and Sandy weren't treated as karate equals, as I find karate episodes to be more interesting when they are equals. Alright, well, that's a pretty sizable amazing tier. And now, no less sizable, literally 13 episodes made this tier, is the great tier. Let's get started. The first episode that'll be put here in this tier is Mooncation, which I'd given a score of 8.9 out of 10. This episode is simply a lot of fun. I felt the beginning of it was a little weak, with some failed jokes, but once we got past that part of the episode, it was just a lot of great stuff for the rest of the 11 minutes. And the last few minutes were so wonderfully action-packed, and I really love that even though SpongeBob played the role of, let's call it Klutz, Sandy was super happy to have him on this trip anyway. A nice spiritual successor to Sandy's Rocket, I'd say. 2 episodes came in with a score of 8.8 out of 10, and the first of these is Are You Happy Now? A surprisingly wholesome episode, Are You Happy Now has the misfortune of including a couple jokes that the fandom latched onto. If you want to hear my fully fledged thoughts on these jokes, check out my review of the episode, but in short, I've got no problem with them, and therefore they do not affect my feelings on this episode, which are positive because I like the idea of SpongeBob trying to help Squidward gain a happiest memory. This episode isn't the funniest, but it does have a good number of moments, so I had a good time watching this one. The other episode to come in with a score of 8.8 out of 10 was Bubble Buddy Returns. This episode is great. In fact, the only thing that stopped it from being in the amazing tier is the fact that it was false advertising, since Bubble Buddy only really appears as a minor, almost cameo appearance, and this episode is all about his son, Shiny. But even with that false advertisement, Bubble Buddy Returns is simply a good time, with SpongeBob running himself ragged trying to babysit this little bubble kid and accidentally popping him through something banal. Classic comedy structure that still delivers. But seriously, let's cool it with the false advertising, okay? 1 episode was given a score of 8.7 out of 10, which was For Here to Go. Can I find it? Oh my gosh. Okay, there we go. That's kind of embarrassing. Anyway, this episode was a surprise when it comes to how good it was, because on paper, this just seems to be a dull, slow affair. I mean, it takes place almost entirely at the Krusty Krab, with most of the episode being just like one event, but the humor keeps this episode from ever being dull, not to mention the excellent dramatics from Mr. Krabs. SpongeBob repeatedly, unwittingly helping Plankton is also another good source of entertainment for me, and the end reveal that Plankton was still foiled in the end, despite technically getting his hands on a patty, was great as well. Next episode to go here on the tier list is gonna be Free Samples, which had a score of 8.6 out of 10. There we go. I found this episode to be especially good with the character dynamics featured in it. Plankton and Karen's banter at the beginning was fun to watch, and everything between SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs in the latter half of the episode was strong as well. Really, this episode's weakest point is the writing for the Bikini Bottomites, who were irritatingly easy to sway. I know it's kind of a calling card for Bikini Bottomites, but that doesn't mean I have to like it. 2 episodes ended up getting a score of 8.7 out of 10, and the first of these is The Other Patty. Oh, there we go. Another episode where one of the biggest strengths is SpongeBob as a character, because he is great here, being his usual optimistic, peacemaking self, while also using some elements of his Troll Bob self to trick Mr. Krabs and Plankton into working together. Shows that he's definitely got some smarts, at the very least some emotional smarts, up there in that head of his. I love it. And Mr. Krabs and Plankton being the centerpieces of this episode are great as well. There's a few dull moments in this one, which is what brings it down here to the middle of the great tier, but it's still a episode that's good to watch. The second episode with a score of 8.5 out of 10 was Home Sweet Rubble. This is one of those episodes that kind of took a second to really get into the swing of things, at least in terms of being enjoyable. The plot itself kicked into high gear immediately, but it wasn't until Patrick wrapped Squidward around SpongeBob's house that I really started enjoying myself. And generally, after this point, the episode was pretty good. I liked seeing everyone working on SpongeBob's house, even if it was hard to watch them all disregard what SpongeBob wanted, and then the way that everything falls apart. But Chekhov's Gary's food saves the day. That's great. I mean, it's me. Of course, I'm gonna like an episode that ends with SpongeBob hugging Gary. Next up, we've got House Sittin' for Sandy, which came in with a score of 8.4 out of 10. This episode is a lot of fun and uses some of the lesser-known similarities between SpongeBob and Sandy, such as their neatness and borderline obsession with which they run their home. Because this episode leans on that aspect of SpongeBob's characterization especially, Patrick here acts as a good foil for him in a way that really calls to mind Tea at the Tree Dome, an association that's especially strong given where this episode takes place. This episode's biggest weakness is in its humor, because while it does have a couple of standout jokes, it also has a few that didn't really work for me, and Patrick himself, while an improvement over other episodes of this season, was still a bit of a weak point. 3 episodes were given a score of 8.3 out of 10, which is kind of surprising to me because that's such a random number to be giving out so much. But anyway, the first of these episodes is going to be Walking the Plankton. This is a pretty enjoyable episode that takes the Krabs-Plankton rivalry to a new location, or really it takes Mr. Krabs to a new location and Plankton follows because he's obsessed with the secret formula. But between some fun gags and some Mr. Krabs and SpongeBob father-son crumbs, this episode has got a lot going for it. What it doesn't have going for it is the general plot structure, with Plankton trying to keep his attempts to steal the formula from Karen, as that's just a plot I don't enjoy on multiple levels, from the obvious outcome of the truth being revealed to Karen being a bit disrespected in a show that hasn't even bothered to give her much of a character by this point, but I still enjoyed this episode. Next, also with that 8.3 out of 10 score, is Restraining SpongeBob. Restraining SpongeBob is one of those episodes with a big mixed bag of elements. There's parts of it that I like, such as its fundamental understanding of SpongeBob and Squidward's dynamic, particularly from SpongeBob's side. I also really like how Patrick was utilized in this episode. It was funny and could be read in 2 different ways that both work well. Patrick's use here is especially refreshing in light of the fact that this season is largely not great for him. However, there are parts of this episode that do really drag it down, such as Squidward's decision to get a restraining order not really fitting the beginning scene of the episode, or Mr. Krabs at first blaming SpongeBob for his lack of efficiency that is a consequence of the restraining order. This episode is also not generally really funny, which thankfully isn't too noticeable while watching, but it is still something to note. And then lastly, for the episodes with an 8.3 out of 10, this is gonna be Karen 2.0. This episode was generally enjoyable except for the part where Plankton is a huge dick. If we even got a reason for him replacing Karen, his character probably would have sat better for me in this episode, but as it was, he was really just being an ass for no reason, which kind of cut into his usual enjoyability factor. Other than that, though, this episode has lots of good stuff. Karen here was great, and while I have issues with the plot, it was nice to see her get a little focus, and I loved her interactions with Mr. Krabs and SpongeBob. Her completely obliterating Karen 2 at the end of the episode was great as well. Moral of the story, we need more Karen focus. The last 2 episodes of the Great Tier came in for a score of 8 out of 10, and the first of these was a SquarePants family vacation. The episode that kicked off the SpongeBob's Runaway Road Trip ratings trap, I mean anthology of episodes, a SquarePants family vacation is just an enjoyable little venture. Patrick being a part of the SquarePants family here is a huge win for me, who loves that kind of family friend dynamic, and I found the adventures that SpongeBob and Patrick got up to in this episode to be enjoyable. Where this episode really struggles is in the pacing, as it's just a bit too slow, and I think this would have been helped immensely had this episode been 16 minutes long rather than 22, but it was a little too early in the show's history for 16 minutes to feel like something feasible. And then last but certainly not least, we've got Mermaid Man Begins. Which of course had that 8 out of 10 score. This is a fun, campy little episode that delves into the origins of Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy in a delight example of pure parody madness. However, this episode is a little bit weak in the pacing department, as I feel like it would have been better for it to be a shorter episode. Coming on down to the yellow square here, we've got 8 episodes that made up the good tier, and the episode kicking things off for this tier is gonna be Squiditis, which came in with a score of 7.9 out of 10. This is one of those mixed bag type of episodes because the first half of this one is actually really great. Like it's interesting, there's a good dynamic between Squidward and Mr. Krabs, and I'm engaged. But it is after Squidward goes home after faking sick that the episode kind of loses me and it becomes boring and a bit repetitive, and I don't really have a ton of good things to say about it until the very end when the whole Krusty crew is miserable. I always hate when a part of an episode drags it down like this, but what can I do? Next is gonna be Glove World RIP, which had a 7.8 out of 10. This episode was a mixed bag that I maybe rated too highly, but well, I'm sticking with the rating. I think the idea of this episode was interesting, but the execution left a bit to be desired, especially when the reveal that Glove World was only closing so that Glove Universe could be created fell a little flat when SpongeBob and Patrick should have been able to find out this information earlier. But that's just me and my nitpicking brain, so when I let go of that, the episode becomes much better. Next up is Fiasco, which had a score of 7.7 out of 10. This episode is solid. While I do enjoy the beginning of it, in general it takes a little bit to get started, and with a couple of jokes that are dead on arrival in this ramping up portion of the episode, it starts off leaving a not so great taste in my mouth. Once Plankton steals the Patty artwork, though, the episode truly picks up, and while it never gets especially funny, it does become very enjoyable, as Plankton goes on the run and then starts threatening people. Patrick's role in this episode is surprisingly decent, especially as he does the sort of ruining everything by eating an important object activity that got me annoyed with him in episodes such as Smooth Jazz at Bikini Bottom or Back to the Past, so good on this episode for improving on that front. Following up, we've got Sentimental Sponge, which also had a score of 7.7 out of 10. A good episode for those of us who enjoy SpongeBob being a weird little dude. I kind of like how in the end, the problem of this episode, which is SpongeBob being unable to let things go thanks to the persuasiveness of Patrick, isn't truly resolved. For some reason, that made me think very deeply, and I can always appreciate when an episode of SpongeBob SquarePants makes me think. Also, I just like watching this one. Yeah, it's a little on the slower side, and it's not the funniest, but it's still a nice episode. Next up, 2 episodes had a score of 7.6 out of 10. The first of these is in SpongeBob. Man, I do like a good, trippy, subconscious exploring episode. And SpongeBob ain't the best episode around, obviously, but it definitely had those vibes down pat. What brings this episode down to this tier is the fact that it isn't really funny, and Mr. Krabs' behavior being a bit irritating when I'm not in the mood for it. And with the episode being not super funny come some moments of it being a little bit boring, which is what brings it down for me. But still, good episode for sure. I enjoyed it. The other episode with a score of 7.6 out of 10 is Plankton's Good Eye. A generally harmless episode that could have been more than what it was, I'd say. Like, this episode is fine and good and dandy, but I have very little to talk about when it comes to it other than I simply enjoyed it and it did its job. It had some uncanny and body horror vibes that I didn't entirely love, so that's one of the reasons why it ended up in this tier instead of the ones above it. But again, the general unremarkability of this episode is what really drew it to this level. Next is gonna be Sweet and Sour Squid, which had a score of 7.5 out of 10. An episode I was rather stoked about given its subject matter of Plankton and Squidward interactions. Sweet and Sour Squid generally didn't disappoint, although I could have used more in the way of this dynamic. It felt a bit lacking, But in terms of the episode itself, I found it to be enjoyable for the most part. During my review, I couldn't help but overthink the plot, so if you haven't seen that review, I'd suggest doing so you can see what I mean. But anyway, that overthinking kind of influenced how I feel about this episode as well, knocking it down a few points. But still, this is a solid episode, more than worthy of my good tier. And lastly, for this tier, we've got treats, which I'd given a score of 7.4 out of 10. Another unfortunate entry in the Gary episodes that at least kind of disappointed me list. Treats is not the best. I don't really like how they did Gary in this episode, since him seemingly having no concept of the idea that SpongeBob cannot get any treats gets a bit irritating. But other than that, I actually like a lot of what this episode has to offer. SpongeBob especially is great here, being a disgruntled pet owner in a way that we don't often see him be. The only time I can think that he was like this was in Gary Takes a Bath, so that's pretty neat. 7 episodes found themselves in the okay tier, and the first of these was The Googly Artiste, which I'd given a score of 6.8 out of 10. This is probably one of the more subtly overhated episodes of the season. In my experience, I found that a lot of people project more onto this episode than what is actually there, and in some ways, I'm no exception. This is an episode about making fun of a specific type of critic, or at least that's one of the things it's about. It's also just supposed to be an episode where Patrick kind of takes Squidward's place as the pretentious artist in residence. Though I think this episode fell a bit short in this regard, as I felt myself become annoyed with Patrick a little more than I'd like, and the episode was more boring than I'd like as well. But certainly not the biggest offender of this kind of thing. 2 episodes were given a score of 6.7 out of 10. Yes, haha, 6-7. And the first of these was Drive Thru. This episode is bogged down by a lot of issues that just add up in the end. Like, we've got the weird construction of the Krusty Krab building, where this episode acts like we haven't sat through 7 full seasons of the building having windows on it. We've got the plot itself being based around a car-centric and car dependency that I'm personally not a fan of. And we've got entitled Bikini Bottomites, which isn't done in a funny way. And all of that just adds up, especially when the episode doesn't supplement it with many funny jokes or even enjoyable moments. It's not a bad episode, like I don't strictly dislike it or anything, and there's good stuff here too, but it's kind of just dull with a tiny bit of distasteful on the side. Also, this episode establishes a potential trend for chaotic episode endings, maybe? The other episode to be given that 6.7 out of 10 score was Move It or Lose It. Here we go. This episode, while it was light with the humor, really earned its spot in this tier because of how completely nonsensical it is, and not in a good way. My suspension of disbelief is really tested here because there is no way in hell that Plankton should be any sort of competition for Mr. Krabs when it comes to which restaurant will be bulldozed. And speaking of that bulldozing, what ends up really pushing this episode down here to the okay tier is how in the end of the episode, how the end of the episode completely just undermines everything that happened during these 11 minutes and rendered them entirely pointless. And again, not in a good way, because the plot itself has to stretch to make this shit make sense. Why would the worker mention that a restaurant is going to be bulldozed when it was just going to be moved back 10 feet? That's just such an unnecessarily forced plot. Or this whole thing is such an unnecessarily forced plot every step of the way for no reason at all, and that's what truly annoys me. 3 episodes were given a score of 6.2 out of 10, which again, very weird, that's such a random number. The first episode with that score that I'll be putting here on the tier is Hot Shot, or The Hot Shot. I don't know why I'm speaking so badly now. The Hot Shot had potential with its idea of SpongeBob being paired with someone who could drive very well, maybe even professionally well, but it didn't really live up to this potential at all, being largely very dull and at times forced, except for the last couple of minutes that were pretty fun. It really is a shame. I hate when episodes have lots of potential but don't use that potential. Next with that 6.2 out of 10 score is going to be Patrick's Staycation. This episode, thankfully, was not a clone of Rise and Shine. That, unfortunately, did not make it good. Similarly to Rise and Shine, which is the episode that I happen to compare it to the most because of this episode's primary location, Patrick's Staycation is kind of just boring for most of it. It's got some good jokes here and there, and the last, minute or so is good, but yeah. And I just didn't really love how SpongeBob was treated in this episode. It wasn't the worst we've seen, especially because SpongeBob elected to do this himself rather than was forced into it, but still not really enjoyable for me. At least the last joke of the episode was good, and while it didn't make seeing SpongeBob be mistreated worth it, it helped it go down a little better for me. And for the last episode, with that 6.2 out of 10 score, that'll be Super Evil Aquatic Villain Team Up Is Go. With such an absurdly long name, you wouldn't think that this episode is as forgettable as it is, and the reason this episode is forgettable is because it manages to completely ignore the excellent setup it created by having Man Ray and Plankton interact. Seriously, an interaction that should have been incredibly entertaining, the stuff that could have been made into a special episode if the desire was there, was reduced to an unearned team-up that went exactly nowhere. Incredibly disappointing. And it doesn't help that much of the rest of the episode was boring too. And then the last episode to be placed here in the OK tier is going to be Face Freeze, which came in with a score of 6 out of 10. This is another one of the many episodes of Season 8 with a poor reputation. And for this episode, like most of the others, I don't think it's deserved, largely because this episode to me is a lot like The Splinter, where the shock factor comedy doesn't really work on me, and so I just find it kind of boring. This episode puts a lot of its comedic eggs into one proverbial basket, baking almost all of its humor on these funny faces that are only somewhat funny at the very beginning of the episode and then fall off from there. And when SpongeBob and Patrick's faces get frozen, it's just minutes upon minutes of unpleasant visuals. Not a huge fan of that either. But I don't dislike the episode or anything, it's just kind of dull. With these 5 episodes remaining, we reach my bottom 5 of Season 8. Just looking at the episodes here, I don't think any of them are very surprising, but the order I put them in might still cause a bit of a shock. Especially because I'll be starting with a rather infamous one, Smooth Jazz at Bikini Bottom. This episode was a part of my mediocre tier, with a score of 5.6 out of 10. While I don't dislike this episode as much as others might, I'm certainly not a fan of it, which is a shame because it actually contained a few things I really did like. For one thing, the dynamic between SpongeBob and Squidward is actually really strong in this episode. While they were at odds for part of the episode, they also worked together as well, and that was just a really nice balance I would have appreciated having more attention drawn towards. Unfortunately, the episode is dragged down by Patrick, whose use as a tool to move the plot was almost entirely unpleasant and frustrating. Seriously, just watching SpongeBob and Squidward be punished by the narrative for things Patrick does with ease is super annoying. Next, for number 4 in my bottom 5, that's going to be Oral Report, which was also a mediocre tier episode, but with a score of 5.3 out of 10. This episode was already a bit hampered by its premise, because any boating school episode that isn't about the test is a little hard for me to get into, although there are certainly exceptions. But that's not at all why Oral Report found itself in this tier. No, this episode is here in the mediocre tier because of its specific combination between being boring and being annoying, especially where Patrick and Sandy are concerned. Patrick because of his behavior, and Sandy because this episode disrespected her, which pissed me off. The episode did get good once we fell into that chaos of the ending, but it was too little too late by that point. For number 3 of my bottom 5, that's going to be A Friendly Game, also mediocre tier but with a score of 5 out of 10. A Friendly Game was an episode that had potential, as watching SpongeBob and Patrick play mini golf when the weather is less than friendly sounds like a great setup to a gag-heavy episode. Even the element of them trying not to wake Squidward was another factor full of potential, but the episode did not deliver on this potential one bit, and instead was rather dull and uninspired, and not to mention it utilized one of my least favorite tropes from the show, Patrick being an unentertaining jackass. For number 2 of the bottom 5, that dishonor is going to go to Squidward's School for Grown-Ups, which was our only barely tolerable tier episode, coming in with a score of 4.9 out of 10. This episode had potential. I mean, an episode about the importance of preserving your inner child and not giving in to the pressure to grow up too early could have been good. Similar to Grandma's Kisses, but still good. Unfortunately, this episode didn't go down that route at all and felt more like it lacked focus and instead wanted to use up its time having Patrick and Squidward be jackasses towards SpongeBob and making itself rather an unpleasant watch. And then now for my number 1 bottom 5 episode, aka my least favorite episode of the season. Well, what else could that be but Pet Sitter Pat, which was put in the bad tier with a score of 3.4 out of 10. This episode is just a mess, literally. The writing is sloppy, the humor is by and large not there, and it's just not pleasant to watch at all. And what's most frustrating is that this episode could have been improved immensely with a few minor changes that would have made it more coherent and more satisfying. It just barely managed not to be in the abysmal tier because I didn't hate this episode, but I certainly didn't like it, basically at all. Just so many failed opportunities. And yeah, that's the whole tier list. Any surprises? Any episodes you put in a different place? I think now is probably the best time to just transition over to talking about season 8 as a whole. So I'll see you there. Before I jump into the big season discussion, I wanted to briefly mention the average episode rating of the season. As a reminder, this average rating doesn't mean much, not for comparing seasons with each other anyway, but it kind of gives a picture of how the ratings panned out for a season. For season 8, the average episode rating was a 7.8 out of 10. That's pretty good. Fun fact, that's the same as both season 4 and season 5. Well, that's kind of fuel for a similarity between these three seasons that I'll be talking about shortly. But much like season 7, I think what this average rating does best is show that maybe this season isn't quite so worthy of its infamous reputation as you might think, at least not in my opinion. And I think that's all I really need to say regarding the average episode rating, so let's move on over to the season discussion, shall we? So, season 8. What else can I say about season 8? Well, I think the first thing I'm going to do for this season discussion is take a look-see at those questions I had posed at the end of my overview of season 7. I asked, and I quote, will season 8 continue season 7's emerging trend of greatness, or are we dipping back down into the depths? If you all might remember, that trend I was talking about had to do with how season 7 refined and improved on elements introduced mostly in season 6, and how it had gotten more adventurous after the show had been playing it safe for much of season 6 as well. And so when it comes to season 8, I'm glad to say that I believe it did continue this trend. But it didn't necessarily further improve the quality of the show or anything like that. In fact, I actually like this season less than season 7, but it's certainly nowhere near a bad season. No, actually, what I think season 8 is, and this might be an unpopular opinion, is a transition season, much like seasons 4 and 5. And here's what I mean by that. So many times throughout this season, I kept being reminded of season 9. Like, this season feels a lot like early season 9. It also feels a lot like season 7. This makes sense, given that it's right between those two seasons. But it feels less like this season has a specific identity of its own, and more that it's moving between two distinct eras of the show. Again, much like seasons 4 and 5. And while I mentioned this season was similar to early season 9, I also wanted to mention that I also started to see the vibes of quote-unquote modern SpongeBob, aka post-sequel SpongeBob, or maybe post-sequel to threequel. I don't know, I haven't fleshed out that part of my eras of the show yet. Anyway, what's important is that I'm starting to see an evolution of the animation, which I swear is becoming more expressive and more fluid, even if we haven't fully switched over to the season 9B plus zaniness. Additionally, just like in season 7, we can see it with the writing. Season 8 is a very adventurous season in my opinion. How many times did I talk about character interactions and dynamics? And I do so for good reason, because I think this season really keeps up the trend of branching out a little bit when it comes to characters that interact with each other, like Squidward and Plankton. It was awesome to see them interact not just once, but twice, in Sweet and Sour Squid and Chum Fricassee. Even just getting more of Karen and Plankton's dynamic in episodes like Walking the Plankton or Karen 2.0 was nice as well. Definitely a good choice. Speaking of good choices, I noticed that both Patrick and Plankton's appearances were cut back on a bit compared to previous seasons, and I'm glad for that. With Plankton, it was getting a little bit trite, and with Patrick, well, there was a time where it seemed like his writing was legitimately going down the toilet. But I'm glad to say that during the second half of the season, this improved exponentially, and a surprise Patrick appearance isn't something that I dread anymore, for the most part. Season 8 varied wildly when it came to the quality. It actually started off relatively poorly, where it first felt like it was rehashing some of Season 6's nonsense, but it's ended in a very strong spot, getting over that kind of bullshit around Pet Sitter Pat. And I find that Season 8 is incredibly underrated, partially because it had that relatively poor start, and also because it's at the tail end of the most infamous era of the show, so it has simply rarely ever been given what I'd call a fair consideration. Thinking of how I'd compare Season 8 to other seasons, it's hard. I mean, it does have the same average rating as Seasons 4 and 5, so I guess I can start there for comparison's sake. I think that Season 8 is very similar quality-wise to Season 5. Even though I also think Season 4 is close to Season 8 quality-wise, it's harder for me to find similarities between Season 8 and Season 4. And in general, I'd say I like Season 8 less than Season 4, and a teeny tiny bit less than Season 5 as well, because Season 8 simply has too many boring episodes, and boringness is something I cannot stand. I also like it less than Season 7, but I like it more than season 6. So that means that season 8 is my second least favorite season. But can't you see what this means? Like, what this says about the show, that this season, which I like and think is good, is my second least favorite? Man, this show is good. Alright, let me switch gears and talk about the name that I'll be giving this season. As always, I gotta give this season a name that I think describes what it means to me. And so I'm not going to give much drama this time. I'll just go ahead and say that I'm giving season 8 the name The Twinkling Season. And yes, I know that name sounds unserious and a bit weird, but walk with me for a second. Twinkle is a synonym of the word waver, which is another word I considered calling this season. But the connotations of waver are negative, and so I think that this season wavers or goes back and forth a lot in deciding what exactly it wants to be, which lends credence to my thought that this season is a transition season. This season brings back a lot of things that season 7 had done away with, like highly boring episodes. This season also does a lot of things characteristic of later seasons, like more adventurous plots and more varied and interesting utilizations of our characters. So it's kind of like it's trying to anchor to one of these vibes and can't decide which one. And by one of these vibes, I mean like anchoring to like what the show had been doing versus what it will do, or what we know it will do in the future. And I also use Twinkling because this season is undoubtedly a hidden gem. I mean, it's lumped into the bad era, which at this point I can definitively say is one bad season, so that's already reason enough to say it's underrated. But not only that, but some people consider season 8 to be the worst season, which I just flat out disagree with. This season is good. It is. And it gets a bad rap for episodes that aren't even that bad. I mean, the worst episode of this season was Pet Sitter Pat, which, to be clear, I did not like, but it's not even abysmal tier. While season 8 is not the most underrated season of the show in my opinion, that honor goes to season 7, it's definitely up there. It's an incredibly overlooked season that should be overlooked no longer. Go watch a season 8 episode today. As always, I'll be ending this video of closing thoughts on a season with my closing thoughts. Now, let me tell y'all, this video was a beast to get done. It took me an entire week to get the script in order. ADHD medication is a literal lifesaver, don't let anyone tell you otherwise, so if this video ends up being a little shorter than my usual season overviews, that's why. It was actually torture to get the script done, even if I really wanted to do it. ADHD is really such a frustrating existence. But anyway, wow. Oh my gosh. I'm done with season 8. I am so proud of myself, honestly, because these last few months have been a mess. By the time this video comes out, I should be graduated from graduate school, which means now I'll finally be joining the workforce. Well, I've had multiple jobs, but y'all know what I mean. I'm getting a full-time job, which could very well mean less time for videos. I'll know more come January, but I'm gonna say now that there won't be any videos until at least the middle of January. I'm going to enjoy my vacation and try to get settled at my new job and new place of living before starting up video making again. But it's possible that I'll have to go down to like one upload a week, or videos every 2 weeks, or something like that. I'll keep y'all posted in the community tab. And of course, I can't let y'all leave this video without hearing one last giant thank you from me. Since this season has been so hectic, I really do appreciate y'all's patience, and thank you for not being those people who comment incessantly about when the next video is. Like, I promise I will see this project through to completion, I just don't need anyone on my back about it. And your continued showing up with it, like when a new video drops, like, I also love that. And know that I read every single comment, even if I don't always respond, so seriously, y'all are the best. And with that, I think it's about time that I bring this video to a close, so I'll end things here, and I'll see y'all in the next review, hopefully soon.